of your work, Emily. We'll look forward to hearing your work very shortly. I'd also like to thank Matilda for editing this book. I think it's rare when we can look back on events in our lifetime that have impacted the world and see some significant change to our culture and how that fits within a historical context. And I think the book Matilda has brought together is a beautiful start to our understanding of AIDS within the context of culture and history. So thank you, Matilda, so much for bringing this project to life. This evening, I'm going to be assisted by Austin Eckelberger. Thank you, Austin. Austin will be helping manage the room and answering questions during the and helping with the questions and answers during that time. I also want to mention that Santa Fe Community College has developed a web page providing links to AIDS information and resources, and I'll paste that URL into the chat in just a moment. If there are resources you would like to see us add to the page, please let me know. You can contact me via email and provide information that way. This isn't a comprehensive website, but something I'm really interested in continuing to grow. So please be in touch with me if there are things you would like to see on it. We also will have books, copies of this book that are being read this evening to give away on the SFCC campus. And I will turn this all over to Emily and let her explain more about that. Emily.
Thank you so much, Val. And thank you to everybody here tonight. I'm so thrilled to be here. And I just see so many wonderful, familiar faces in the audience. And I'm grateful. I wanted to mention that this event is in partnership with the Santa Fe Community College Foundation, and many thanks to Deborah Bolt. And oh my goodness, I'm going to start trying to remember everybody, Deborah and Kelly and Ian, for all of your support. And part of what's happened is that we are giving away 10 free books to the first 10 folks, 10 students to apply for any scholarship at our school. And I also wanted to especially mention that we have a scholarship for queer and trans folks. And we also have a scholarship, creative writing scholarship, called the Richard Bradford Memorial Scholarship. And I can tell you more information about that if you'd like to email me, or you can check the website. But the first 10 students to apply for scholarships will receive a free copy of the book, and I will be checking back and I will contact the students. So I wanted to mention that and thank Financial Aid and the foundation. Thank you so much, Val, as we get started. Okay, I don't think I'm forgetting anything else before I have the complete honor of introducing the editor of this incredible anthology, Matilda Bernstein Sycamore. And Matilda is the author most recently of The Freezer Door, a New York Times editor's choice, one of Oprah Magazine's best LGBTQ books of 2020, and a finalist for the PEN Jean Stein Book Award. Her previous nonfiction title, The End of San Francisco, won a Lambda Literary Award, and her novel Sketch to See was one of NPR's best books of 2018. Sycamore is the author of 2 nonfiction titles and 3 novels, as well as the editor of 5 previous nonfiction anthologies. Whoa, you're like an anthology elder. That's a lot. Including Why Are Faggots So Afraid of Faggots? Flaming Challenges to Masculinity, Objectification, and the Desire to Conform, an American Library Association Stonewall Honor Book. She lives in Seattle, and her next book, Touching the Art, will be published by Soft Skull in 2023. Between Certain Death and a Possible Future, queer writing on growing up with the AIDS crisis is her 6th anthology. And I'm so honored to say, welcome, Matilda. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much, Emily, for that beautiful introduction. And thank you for the invitation and for doing the work to make this event happen. Thank you also, Valerie, for your beautiful words about the book, and for Austin for helping to put this together tonight. I want to welcome everyone here for this reading for Between Certain Death and a Possible Future. This is the book tour finale on World AIDS Day. And I also want to encourage people to light up the chat at any point. While I'm talking, while our readers are reading, we want to know you're here. So feel free, anything that draws your attention, feel free to just light it up. Tell us where you're joining from, tell us your thoughts, and ask any questions you want in the chat, because there will be time for a Q&A with me and with all the contributors at the end of the event tonight. So thanks again, everyone, for coming. Between Certain Death and a Possible Future came about when I realized there was a missing generation in AIDS literature and cultural politics. Usually, we hear about two generations. The first, coming of age in the era of gay liberation, and then watching entire circles of friends die of a mysterious illness as the government did nothing to intervene. And now we hear about younger people growing up with effective treatment and prevention available and unable to comprehend the magnitude of the loss. We're told that these two generations cannot possibly understand one another and thus remain alienated from both the past and the future. But there's another generation between these two, one that came of age in the midst of the epidemic with the belief that desire intrinsically led to death and internalized this trauma as part of becoming queer. I'm a part of this generation. We share experiences with both of the more commonly portrayed generations. Maybe we are a bridge between them. This is my sixth anthology, and with every new project, I always start with an open call for submissions that I circulate as widely as possible so I can bring together the broadest range of perspectives. When I was writing the call for submissions this time, I was careful not to impose specific dates on the generational frame, because I knew this would vary depending on the wide variety of factors, including race, class, gender, religion, ethnicity, rural or urban experience, regional or national origin, HIV status, and access to treatment and prevention over time and in shifting contexts. I knew that any generational frame only offers a partial truth, so I didn't want to impose artificial boundaries. I wanted to put out the idea and see who responded. I originally thought of this anthology as including anyone who came of age sexually in the midst of the AIDS crisis before the advent of effective treatment. But one thing that happened as soon as I started reading submissions was that the scope of the book expanded to include some people growing up well after the emergence of protease inhibitors, but still experiencing the feeling of growing up between certain death and a possible future. To me, an anthology is an intervention. My goal is not to create a definitive text, but to inspire more stories from even more angles, to facilitate even more conversations, to deepen the analysis, to complicate the narratives. As I was working on this anthology, I was flooded by my own memories, so many stories I'd almost forgotten, hovering at the edge of my awareness. Like when I was 19 and I drove cross country to move to San Francisco. What I remember most from that drive was stopping at a rest area somewhere in the middle of the country where I'd never been, getting out of the car to throw out my trash. And while I was stretching, the rest stop attendant came out wearing orange rubber gloves that went up to his elbows. And he pulled my trash out of the garbage and put it in a giant blue plastic bag that he immediately tied to dispose of elsewhere. You need to leave, he said, or I'm going to call the cops. To be a 19-year-old faggot at a rest area in so-called Middle America in 1992 meant you were a threat. What if someone got AIDS from your trash? In San Francisco, I found the dykes and fags and gender-bending weirdos and other outsider queers like myself. We needed one another to survive the world that told us we deserved to die. We broke down every day in every way, but we believed we were creating something else. We needed to believe in order to live. In San Francisco in the early 90s, AIDS was everywhere. And now I realize how much shutting off was required to exist in day-to-day experience. You couldn't express shock at everyone dying right in front of your eyes because shock felt like a form of cruelty. So you would act like everything might be okay, even when nothing was okay. You met some queen on the street and she was showing off her lesions in a campy way, and then she was dead. You went to the beach with a group of people and some boy was flirting with you, and then you were asking around about him. There was that look in his eyes and you wanted to see that look again, but he was dead. You slept with someone you knew was positive and he wanted to make it romantic. So he lit candles around the bathtub before you got in together. And a few weeks or months went by and you wonder what happened to him, but he was dead. I didn't go to memorials because I felt like I didn't have a right to be there. I felt like I would be stealing other people's grief. And this is a generational story too. We were coming of age in the midst of all this death, but we felt like it was not ours to mourn. If there's one thing I want this anthology to do, it's to open up the possibilities for feeling everything. Grief is not something you can steal. You can silence it, yes. And I think that's what our culture has done. Dominant culture, gay culture, queer and trans cultures. The grief has become internalized and the consequences have been devastating, intimately, interpersonally, culturally, and communally. In this anthology, there are 36 essays from an expansive range of contributors. I could have included many more. Every time I read through the book, I find myself getting emotional in surprising places, even after the work has become so familiar. I can't predict what you will feel, but I can predict that you will feel. Maybe it will be grief, or rage, or loss, or laughter, or longing, or curiosity, or inspiration, or empathy, or craving, expansion or contraction, devastation or catharsis, connection or confusion, revelation or confirmation, or all of this at once. Let's talk about everything so we can feel everything. Let's feel it all so our future remains possible. So thank you all for joining us. A warm round of virtual applause for everyone here this evening. We have 5 amazing contributors here to read from their pieces in the book. And again, I want to encourage anyone who has questions at any point, just throw them in the chat. Also, if you have any feedback or want to say hello to us, feel free. So without further ado, our first contributor this evening, Baron Mckenzie, is an award-winning freelance playwright, writer, actor, and producer. His writing credits include Bloodbath at St. Paul's, Fashion Police, Meet the Months, and Jonesin, as well as his 2 full-length plays, Get Off the Cross, Mary, and the critically acclaimed children's play, NGG RFG. Baron is currently part of the inaugural year of the Warner Media X Global Access Writers Academy and has been chosen as the 2021-2022 BIPOC Fellow for the prestigious Catalyst Theatre Confluence Fellowship in Edmonton, Alberta. Please welcome Baron Mckenzie.
Yay! Hi, everybody. I just want to begin by thanking the Santa Fe Community College. Emily, Valerie, Austin, thank you for all the service you're doing. Congratulations to my fellow contributors. It's an honor to be here with you tonight. And Matilda, not only do I want your fashion sense, but thank you for asking me to be a part of this. This has just been, it's changed my life. So thank you so much. Hockey night in Canada. Edmonton, 1984. I am underage and working in the gay bars. Randy is a waiter. I am a busboy. Randy is bearded and into leather. I am small and effeminate. I'm told I look like a girl. He has a laugh that fills the room and his eyes dance with mischief as he chases men around the bar. Randy is always having sex, and I am jealous because it isn't ever with me. Randy gives me a key to his apartment, so I always have a place to go. He sleeps in and I clean up while watching soap operas and the Oprah Winfrey Show. One day I hear Oprah talking about the gay cancer. Her guest is a man with purple marks on his face. You are going to die of that. I push the thought out of my head and take the dirty dishes to the kitchen. One day, Randy asked me to meet him at his favorite restaurant at 4 p.m. He has to tell me something. He is drunk and has been crying. I have it, the cancer, the gay fucking cancer. As he speaks, I can see the same purple blemish on his temple that the guy on Oprah had. I reach across the table and grab his hands. He cries and drinks until he is falling out of his chair. I ask for the check and take him home. The next day, he is up early. He is cheerful and resolute, like nothing is wrong. I need you to take care of the cats. I'm going to travel, New York, San Fran, and Boston. I'm calling it my Screw You Tour. I'm going to fuck my way across America and give it to everyone that gave it to me. I am left alone in his apartment for a month. I am lonely and depressed. It all starts to sink in. He is going to die soon. I can hear it in his voice. Every time he calls, he sounds weaker. I can feel the walls closing in on me. Everyone I know and care about is now getting sick. Randy phones me late one night, wasted. I'm coming home. I'm ready. I light candles in the bedroom and change the sheets on his bed. Randy looks so different from the man who left a month ago. He has lost most of his body fat, and his face looks like a wooden puppet. The purple splotches are everywhere. I sit with him on the edge of the bed and take his hand in mine. Sleep with me. Have sex with me so I can die with you. His eyes flash with rage. Spit flies out of his mouth as he screams inches from my face. You selfish fuck. You have everything going for you. Look at me. Look at my face. I'm covered in fucking lesions. You are pristine and young and smart and beautiful. Where do you get off asking me to kill you? Get out. Get out of my fucking house. He kicks me out of his apartment and refuses to see me again. I am bussing tables at the gay bar when one of Randy's fuck buddies tells me that he's dead. I am 16 years old. Vancouver, 1994. The lesions on my legs keep moving up. The sores cover my feet from the tips of my toes to just above my ankles and show no signs of stopping. I have nerve damage and my feet are hypersensitive to the touch. Even a bed sheet brushing against them makes me scream out in agony. The specialist says this is because the AIDS virus has nowhere to go, so it's settling in my extremities. Feet first, hands later. His main concern is to control the pain and stop the spread of the lesions. If he can't, they may have to consider amputation. I have been placed on a number of pain pills, but have built up a resistance to them. Now I am on liquid morphine, which I can administer myself every 4 hours through a shunt in my arm. The doctors don't know about my addictions: cocaine, alcohol, sleeping pills, anti-anxiety medications, Valium, morphine, Dilaudid, Neocitrin. My trips to the doctor are exhausting, and I get into bed as soon as I arrive home. The ringing phone jolts me out of my sleep. I hear a tired voice on the other end. It's time. Tom is whispering. He doesn't want to wake up Billy Boy's mom, dad, and brother who arrived yesterday. Billy Boy's family disowned him after he came out of the closet. They just showed up out of the blue when they heard he didn't have much time left. Tom is an angel who stepped in to help when Billy Boy needed care. They met in Edmonton and moved out to Vancouver together when they were teenagers in the early 80s. Tom and I dated the same man at separate times. We became fast friends. If you want to say goodbye, now is the time. The doctor said he won't make it through the night. The guys will pick you up in about an hour. I hear noises in the background that sound like an animal moaning. Tom says he has to go and hangs up the phone. My pain right now is really bad and I have to get it under control before Sandy and the other guys pick me up. I hate taking this drug with me everywhere I go, so I load up my syringe with extra cc's of morphine and push it through the shunt in my arm. I pack a flap of leftover cocaine in case I need to take the edge off, and I wait. I examine my bloodshot eyes in Billy Boy's bathroom mirror. I wipe the last remnants of cocaine off the tip of my nose. I look like shit. The familiar feeling of numbness mixed with stinging in my feet is starting to return, which means the last hit of morphine is wearing off. I should have brought some with me. Hopefully I won't be here too much longer. I open the bathroom door and I see the three factions. In one corner of the living room, Billy Boy's family sits watching the hockey game. At the opposite end and squished into the dining room are 15 of his closest friends, ranging from my age to the respected old guard of our community, the gaggle of gays. In the middle of the living room, separating good and evil, lies Billy Boy, moaning on the hide-a-bed. We've been here for hours. The doctor said he would be dead soon, but Billy Boy is being stubborn as usual.
Thank you, Baron, for that beautiful reading. Let's have another round of virtual applause for Baron Mckenzie. And now, our second contributor, Dan Cullinane, is a freelance writer whose work has appeared in a number of anthologies and publications. He worked in LGBTQ publishing for many years, before relocating to Northeast Tennessee to work for a wilderness therapy program. Please welcome Dan Cullinane.
I think I'm on. I think I managed to turn both the speaker and the video on. Thank you for this opportunity and for putting this together, Matilda. It's amazing. And Berend, I loved your story the first time I read it, and hearing you read it tonight just really moved me. So I'm really honored to be able to read after you. My story is called Andy Bell Made Me Gay, and I'm going to bounce around a little bit in it, but hopefully contextually it'll make sense. I wasn't quite 17 when my brother asked me, "You know what gay stands for?" "What?" I asked, feeling sick because I'd already heard the joke. "Got AIDS yet?" And everyone laughed, and I laughed too, and my laugh sounded horrible in my ears because I was terrified, and I was wondering why he'd asked me that. I wanted to scream at him and his stupid friends who were supposedly also my friends, and I hated myself because I didn't scream at them, "I'm gay, you stupid motherfuckers. And I guess when I die, you're just going to laugh your stupid motherfucking asses off." I was going to die because I was gay. I was abominable, and I was doomed. Sex took place on a minefield of fear and judgment. There was still a shadow of abandon, but as I put together a circle of friends my own age, I learned the rules. Righteously, steadfastly, angrily, we rejected the notion that we were to blame for bringing the plague on ourselves, but we were cautious and censorious. We would not indulge ourselves in those old and dangerous ways, and those who did would be re-educated or shunned. Before silence equaled death, desire equaled death. We drank, did lots of coke, danced until last call, then ate pancakes at the buttery and went our separate ways as the sun was coming up. We kissed and said goodnight. Sometimes we hooked up, sometimes we made out, sometimes we went home with someone we had just met. Usually I was too drunk to do much more than pass out naked alongside a stranger. We carried condoms scrupulously, but we rarely needed them because fucking was off limits. The bars were booming, but now we watch New Order videos instead of porn in the back rooms, and we didn't touch. Or we cruised for contact, lips on lips, hands above the waist. Being gay begins with fear and shame, and then blissfully turns into freedom from all that. In Mount Vernon, our neighborhood, we held hands, we kissed in public. We were loud and out and proud. We held each other as we danced, jumped atop the speakers, and writhed together in sweaty pantomime, but resisted our impulses for more until we could no longer. And after that, we felt fearful and ashamed and sweated out our next HIV test. At the Hippo, I leaned against the rail, drinking a beer, watching my friends dancing below, and I saw skeletons. Volunteering for Hero had pulled me out of the safe zone, and now I grasped that there was no us and them. That night, instead of smiles, laughter, and the suggestion of sex, I saw a disjointed death throw. Just as I had back on that hot August afternoon under the Carolina pines, I realized that to be me meant I would die soon, unless I was a little less gay. I met a man, and he was scared too. In 1989, the number of reported AIDS cases in the United States topped 100,000. So we ran together to the suburbs and bought a brand new townhouse among thousands of other brand new townhouses on a brand new cul-de-sac in Owings Mills. We had 3 bedrooms, 1 baby tree in the front yard, 2 cats, and a Blockbuster video card. We darted inside and shut the door. Hard work and focus achieved a stultifying heteronormativity that might have been a version of Happily Ever After, until at an Erasure concert in 1990, Andy Bell kicked me in the head. With a ferocious in-your-face attitude, he pranced across the stage at Merriweather Post Pavilion in jockey shorts and fuck-me pumps, sweating like a stevedore. He was a cherub with an angel's voice, yet seemingly ready to sodomize anyone who looked at him crossways. He appalled the straight boys who had discovered Erasure in college, but he set me on fire. I had scampered to the suburbs because I was frightened. In my absence, fear had turned to fury, and it was catching. I ran because I didn't want to die, but I was dying all the same. My immune system hadn't turned on me, but I had. My quiet little world crumpled under the wave of gay men who were no longer asking for permission to fight for their lives. We left each other. He stayed in Owings Mills. I picked up some booze and a fresh pack of smokes. And now from my bed in my apartment in Mount Vernon, I could watch the silhouettes of rats climbing the fire escape. Chris Cornell and Eddie Vedder and Billy Corgan bounced off the walls as I read David Feinberg's 86 and learned about not giving a fuck what anyone thought. I read James Robert Baker's Tim and Pete sitting in the window of the laundromat on Preston Street as the world grew dark and the city lit up, and I realized that rage and vengeance tasted better than victimhood. I met a man and we collided like grappling wrestlers, knocking pictures off his wall on our way to his bed. Chris and I went together to the March on Washington in '93 and rode home on a train loaded with gays, my head in his lap, his hand in my hair. It didn't go anywhere, and that was fine. Stephen, the lanky boy from my first days in Baltimore, reappeared in the doorway of a shop on Charles Street. And now we played pinball at the Eagle and Hearts, sitting cross-legged on the floor of my apartment. I met Tommy at the HF Festival in DC. He came and went, always happy to share his weed at the Mount Royal Tavern or up on the Thomas Viaduct or wherever we ended up. He's positive, our friend Suzanne told me. I didn't care. I wanted his hands on my body and mine on his. Winter came and Stephen called. I tested positive, he said. Then Chris called and said he had too. Death danced around me again, and I danced back. Nights at Club 1722, walking home as morning crept over the city, dancing with anyone or no one, but always dancing. Waking up in this bed or that bed until I decided I liked waking up in my own bed, and now they had to come home with me. Michael knocked on my window and I let him in because it was cold outside and his coat looked thin. He took off his clothes, and because he had, I did too, and why not? I knew his body, skinny and knotted with muscle, blonde hair so light it was almost invisible against his white skin. He lay on top of me and pushed into me, and I knew that he wasn't wearing a condom, and I didn't care. He bit my neck and I felt him come inside me, and I came to without touching myself because giving up felt so good. I'm not going to run. I'm going down with the ship, side by side with the men I love, our fists raised in defiance and triumph. Sex was counterinsurgency, a kamikaze dive. I knew what I was doing, and I did it because I was choosing sides. This is my world. These are my people. I had warmed myself back to life by their fire, and if that fire wanted to consume me in recompense, that was fair. When February came, I was done with winter and wanted something warmer. I smoked one last bong with Tommy, and in the morning pointed my car west for California. Tommy died, Stephen died, Dean died, Jeff died. I didn't. I didn't get sick. I tested negative. I tested negative again. And that's it.
Thank you so much for that beautiful reading, Dan. Let's have another round of virtual applause for Dan Cullinane. And I see that Andrew Spieldener remembers that Erasure concert. So there's a lot of memory here. Our next contributor, Emily Stern, is the author of This Is What It Sounds Like, a memoir about her childhood and her mother's death in 1993 from complications of HIV/AIDS, as well as the manuscript, The Shape of What Spilled, about her experience and ongoing recovery from a mild traumatic head injury. She founded Intersectional Consulting and uses original educational tools, including El Corazon Deck, designed to inspire intersectional critical thinking. Emily is full-time faculty at Santa Fe Community College and holds an MFA in creative nonfiction with a critical emphasis on women and AIDS in literature from Goddard College. Find more at emilystern.com, and please welcome Emily Stern.
Thank you so much, Matilda. It's such a pleasure to be here. And my book is about my mom and me and my family. And I have a teenager kiddo, and she asked me tonight if I wanted her to read my piece because I was explaining that I was nervous. And I just couldn't really pass up that incredible opportunity to witness my kiddo reading about our family. And so my daughter is going to read the first page of my piece, the few pages that I'm reading this evening. And so, Francesca, would you like to read, please? And thank you so much, Angel Face.
Yes. Okay, To Make a Whore Of, Highland, Indiana, 1991. Mom, what is it, Emily? The last part of my name became thinned, crackled, netting as her voice lost its shape and sent her coughing again. I waited until I heard her spit. Mom? She didn't answer but opened the door and walked past me into the kitchen. I followed and stood by the table waiting as she poured a glass of water and put a cup of that morning's coffee into the microwave. Her collarbone created a crease in her gauzy leopard print button-down shirt. Her short black skirt, usually classy, slutty, and risque, was limp at her waist with no cornbread booty, as her boyfriends used to call it, to speak of. The seams that were once bursting now hung slightly bent and confused. I wasn't confused, though. I was incredibly sure that my worst fear had manifested. It was just like the research papers I'd written in my English classes and the speeches I'd given in Miss Petron's public speaking course. First came an unexplainable weight loss and then a weird flu that didn't go away. What happened next depended on the person. It could be purple splotchy lesions all over the body, Kaposi's sarcoma. But that seemed to happen more than men. Women often got pneumonia. They had a shorter incubation period and almost always died faster. Aside from that, in 1991, there wasn't much information about women who contracted HIV.
Thank you. Abstinence education, the government's and in turn the media's answer to HIV infection, seem more dangerous and destructive than all the STDs combined. More shame, more secrecy, more puritanical bullshit, and so more stigma. If you'd secretly polled most of the teenagers I knew if the threat of hell or gay cancer was keeping them pious on a Saturday night, their answer would be no. Where we lived in Northwest Indiana, no one talked about safe sex. At Highland High, the nurse's office refused to offer condoms, so I got free condoms at Planned Parenthood and strategically left them in bathrooms around school and around town. Sometimes I'd leave them in our bathroom at home, tucked inside a Star or Mademoiselle, along with the pamphlets about safe sex, HIV, and hepatitis. I figured if she wanted to be loved so much that she'd date men who hurt her kids and stole her car, she probably wasn't enforcing a no glove, no love rule. My mother never mentioned finding condoms, and I didn't mention leaving them. I never saw any pamphlets at Planned Parenthood about using clean needles, or I would have left those too. I watched my mom drink her coffee over the sink. Steam floated from the mug. It looked like it was coming out of the top of her head. She made a loud slurpy sound, and for the billionth time, I wondered why she didn't just wait for the coffee to cool. I started to say that to make her laugh, but shut my mouth, held my breath, and chewed on the inside of my lip. Staring at her diminished figure, I tried again. Mom, have, she was facing me and leaning against the sink now. She looked irritated and suspicious and ready to fight with me. She also looked tired and sad. I decided now was as good a time as any. Have you ever had an AIDS test? What? I stumbled backwards, feeling indignant and then angry and then genuinely surprised. Had she not considered HIV? Or that her string of horrible boyfriends and ongoing drug use might scare or upset her kids? Though maybe she hadn't. I was almost certain that Jessica hadn't ever asked her about anything. Jessica was a mother's wet dream, instinctively following the rule that children should be seen and not heard, an expectation seeping from our maternal old world mix of Catholic Sicilian DNA. And most likely, David, my brother, had also never said anything, which was probably more of an adherence to the rule number 1 of the Sicilian firstborn male bylaws, loyalty no matter what. But my loyalty was to the truth, and the truth seemed as obvious as the ever-growing lines of exhaustion on her face and the windy echoes of a skirt searching for 50 lost pounds. Emily, what are you talking about? She snapped. Well, it's just that, well, you've lost so much weight and you keep saying that you have the flu and you keep coughing. And I was just wondering. I forced myself to look her in the eye. She didn't meet my gaze. Instead, she looked out the window at the remains of a quickly fading sunset. Mom? You know what, Emily? Fuck you. She stormed into her room and slammed the door. 15 minutes later, my mom emerged from her bedroom and stood behind the couch where I was sitting, punishing myself by watching the TV show Small Wonder. I didn't look up. Yes, I have, she said. It was negative. I turned around and we really looked at each other. I was surprised she'd come out of her room, and I was also surprised the test had come back negative, if she'd really gotten one. I just didn't think I could be wrong. Not that I wanted to be right about her having HIV. You went back for the results? I asked her. No, Emily, they called me. I thought that was strange. One time I'd asked Planned Parenthood how it worked to get tested, and they made a big deal about how I'd have to come in to get the results no matter what. Where did you go? They don't usually give those results on the phone, Mom. I went to the Board of Health in the city, okay? She waved both of her hands in front of me. She waved both of her hands in front of her like a Sicilian member of the Supremes and said, "Now, stop, enough. I'm going to lie down." She disappeared into her room and I thought it over. I knew from my studies that there's a 3 to 6 month window between being exposed to the virus and the antibodies actually showing up on a test. My intuition was that she hadn't lied to me about taking the test or even testing negative. But based on her symptoms, I thought she was actually now HIV positive. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that beautiful reading, Emily and Francesca. Let's have another round of applause for both of them. That was beautiful. And our next contributor, Andrew R Spieldener, PhD, is an associate professor in the departments of communication and women, gender, and sexuality studies at Concordia University in Montreal. Dr. Spieldener's writing is at the intersection of health and culture, particularly looking at HIV and the LGBTQ community. A longtime HIV activist, Dr. Spieldener serves as vice chair of the US People Living with HIV Caucus and North American delegate to UNAIDS. Please welcome Andrew R. Spieldener.
Thank you, Matilda, and thank you all for having us. And thank you, my co-contributors. It's an honor to be in community with all of you. To say goodbye, I do not like coming back to the Bay Area. This is where the ghosts are, where I came of age, where I started learning some truths about myself, and where I told lies meant to show what I wanted to be and become. This is where I made my first faltering attempts to connect with others and where I failed and lost. I recognize these as queer tactics, so the strategic truths and the myth-making, the activism and resistance, the attempts and failures to connect. I see these same maneuvers in the broader community as we create memories that include some people and exclude others. The lies take a shape, they have a weight, and if the lies do, then surely the lives do too. I am haunted by the mistakes I've made and the people I've lost, even the ones forgotten over the years. Goodbye. Thank you. You made an impact. I want to touch you again. We will miss you. I wish future generations would meet you. I wish I could remember what you sounded like. In the United States, people have a hard time with the end of life. We do not see dying as a natural part of the life cycle. We have morgues where no one has to see the dead, funerals where no body is revealed. Morticians want pictures to see if they can return the body to its best state. Dying is something to put off, to fight until the last breath, as if struggle were the proof of the value of the life. I am from a generation of gay men who came of age well into the HIV epidemic. I went for HIV tests regularly until my test came back positive in 98 or 99, could never quite remember. My capacity for friendship and intimacy emerged in the context of a dying generation. We learned how to attend funerals, to accept that some relationships go unresolved, and to say goodbye. A 2013 email from a peer who moved across country. I am so glad this is over. I am also regretful about many choices I've made, in particular the last 5 years, but grateful you tried in small and big ways to offer loving support. It made huge difference making it as far as I did. Ultimately, there was too much pain and baggage to extricate and try to fix and or ameliorate. I will miss all the fun and transcendent experiences we shared together. Please cherish those and keep them close to your heart, as I will always, with love and admiration till we meet again. My partner and I considered him a friend. He was, in fact, the person who had introduced us. We phoned him immediately. He was loopy, obviously high. He talked about the clear sky and bright sun, the sound of children playing in the background. It was enough, he said. Life is enough. I soothed him, then asked for confirmation. He said he was sure, this is it, goodbye. Then he hesitated. We spoke about the children playing in the park he was in. Help, he pleaded, changing his mind even as he felt himself slipping from the drugs already in his system. I had my partner keep him on the phone while I worked on getting first responders to him. He spent the next month in a treatment facility. After the incident, my partner looked at me with anger, disgust, and horror. You would have let him die? You're a monster. I was respecting his choice. This is the third time he's called me like this. I can't want him to live more than he does. No one can do his life for him. My partner, 7 years younger, did not have the same experiences I had of weekly funerals and drag shows to raise money for them. Would you do that to me if I was dying? Just let it happen? That was what you wanted. He took the dogs for a long walk, needing some space from me. I do not think he will ever forgive me for my honesty. Our relationship ended soon after. With love and admiration, till we meet again. Each era of HIV has particular characteristics that impact the ways that we come to know our bodies and each other. For me, the early 90s in the Bay Area taught me to value touch, to sit with disgust, and to commemorate events and people before we fade away. For a decade, whenever I returned to the Bay Area, I was greeted on the street and in bars with, "Girl, I thought you died." At some point, this stopped because those familiar with me had either passed or moved away from the gentrified city, but the memory lingers. We are a generation of witnesses, and this weight shapes how we love, how we fight, and how we break away. I hold this personal version of an AIDS memorial within. It comes between me and other relationships. I know what loss means. I approach people knowing I will say goodbye. I do not know if I will ever be comfortable in the Bay Area. The city discomfits me. It is where the ghosts are for me. And until I find a way to make peace with those missing, I remain haunted. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that beautiful reading, Andrew. Let's have another round of virtual applause for Andrew Spieldener. And also, before our final reader this evening, I want to encourage people, if you have any questions at any point, just throw them into the chat and we're going to have a few minutes to address them at the end. Our final contributor, Liam October O'Brien, grew up on a small island. His writing has appeared in Art and Understanding magazine, the Denver Quarterly, the Boiler, Beast, the Bennington Review, and the New Delta Review. He received his MFA at the Iowa Writers Workshop and is one of the founding editors of Vetch, a magazine of trans poetry and poetics. He lives in Brooklyn. Please welcome Liam October O'Brien.
Thank you so much, Matilda. Can everybody hear me? Let's see, maybe not.
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much. It's been a while since I did a Zoom. Thanks, Matilda. Thanks to everyone for having me. It feels so great to be a part of this event and to hear all of these essays come alive in people's voices when I've only lived with them on the page. I'm just going to read a couple excerpts from Across the Gap Between Us. I was in the cemetery when I started reading Love Alone, Paul Monet's book of elegies for his lover, Roger Horwitz. It wasn't my plan to be morbid. The late February day was bizarrely, blissfully warm, and my boyfriend Stephen and I had taken a blanket to lie among the gravestones of ancient Iowans and read. He saw what I'd brought. Wow, he said, why do you want to destroy yourself? I've been meaning to read it for so long, I said, and settled in, holding the book like a shield between my eyes and the sun. Monet said of these poems that he wanted them to allow no escape, like a hospital room, or indeed a mortal illness. This is his explanation of the form he uses, which hurtles forward without comma or stanza break, leaving the reader no rest, no ledge to catch hold of. The poems throw themselves at Raj's death, breaking again and again on its simultaneous impossibility and finality. In the cemetery, I read 4 poems, then I was crying. I have to stop, I told Stephen. He reassured me, comforted me, gave me an extra book. Soon enough, the winter wind came back from its smoke break and we went home. I read all of Love Alone slowly, a few poems at a time, over the next several months. Whenever I returned to it, as I did today, I noticed the same physical reaction. My heartbeat speeds. My whole body tenses from the stomach out. Breathing becomes harder. Eventually, as during a frightening movie, I shut my eyes. I was born in Santa Fe, New Mexico, in 1990, the year Keith Haring and Ryan White both died of AIDS. It was the year the Americans with Disabilities Act became law. It was a year before the first Santa Fe AIDS Walk and before the Red Ribbon at the Tony Awards. It was several years before effective treatment for HIV, before the peak of AIDS-related diagnosis. Within all this, I was a baby at a gay wedding performed within the Quaker meeting I was born into. I was a baby getting love and praise from gay men in the restaurants where my father worked. I was a baby too young to remember. Some people got sick, some didn't. I'll never be sure who I would have been close to if I'd grown up in Santa Fe and if they'd lived. But a lot of people died, and for other reasons, we left. Paul Monet writes in his memoir, Borrowed Time, that gay men put our history together from the scattered artifacts we can find. Fragments are all you get, he says. You jigsaw the rest together with your heart. Coming of age in the years following the height of the AIDS epidemic, it's impossible not to feel resentful about having to rely so largely on fragments instead of all the friends and lovers and mentors I should have known. I've been thinking about the texts Monet wrote after he knew he was going to die soon. By all accounts, he worked obsessively. In one elegy, Elizabeth Nonas describes him tethered to his IV, pushing the pole that had been Roger's from one room to another to write. Memoirs, novels, essays, poems. I know because he said so that he thought of this writing as his own contribution to the collection of fragments. I knew he hoped another generation would seek them out to inform our own sense of history and self. These are missives thrown across the gap between us. After the first night Stephen and I started kissing, we spent a week or so in bed. We were in college. I had a room in a green cooperative with the branches of trees lapping my windows on 2 sides. I was delirious with the new experience of taking my clothes off with another person. In bed with him, I literally trembled. Then, in the middle of the idyll, the rash began on my left hand. It reddened, swelled, blistered. Overnight, it was on my face, spreading up from my cheeks to my temples, forehead, eyelids, the curve of my ear, hot and itching. Something like this had happened once a few years before. It's herpes, I said. It's congenital. It'll pass in a week or so. I'll go to health services on Monday. It was Saturday. Stephen stayed with me. He was terrified. I was humiliated. We went out in the warm night, sat on a boulder by the dark dining hall. My face was swollen, pink and crusty, bubbling. It didn't look like mine. What if something's really wrong? He asked under the lamplight. It's fine, I told him, I promise. When I turned up at health services first thing on Monday, they took one look and called a van to take me to the emergency room. Stephen and our friend MJ piled in, holding me on either side. I remember waiting a long while. I remember the triage nurse saying, "Oh boy." I remember being wheeled down the hall in a stretcher, Stephen walking beside me. I remember a CT scan that I didn't understand, a doctor in a room, questioning, superior and detached. I saw Stephen angry for the first time then. He punished that doctor, coming back and pushing for clarity, refusing to let the man escape. What's going on, he wanted to know. What are you going to do to fix it? Nobody knew what was wrong. They admitted me and started to try out drugs. I remember the dull pain and itch of the IV in my arm. I remember barely being able to open my eyes, the lids so swollen. I remember Stephen standing by my bed, not sure if it was safe to touch me, holding onto my knee under the hospital blanket, kissing me there. They wouldn't let him stay overnight, so he ran back to campus through a thunderstorm. He told me later he knew that he was seriously in love with me because he thought I might die, and he understood what that would do to him. The only drug name I remember is the one that worked. It was Bactrim, and I didn't think of it again until reading Paul Manette's Borrowed Time this year. Among other things, it's an antibiotic used to treat pneumocystis pneumonia. Doctors put Roger Horwitz on it during his first episode. I explained that the organism in the lung was bacterial and would respond nicely to Bactrim, Manette records. The mere brand name would tip people off in these days, but not then. Bactrim doesn't mean AIDS-related pneumonia these days, or any specific illness. I would leave the hospital after 5 days. My face returned to me. We never found out what had happened. Nothing grew from the cultures the doctors took. Every few years, I will find a hot red patch on my hand or my ear, a couple of clear blisters, and my breath stops. But the blisters have no strength to spread and fade within a day. In Borrowed Time, I read Manette's account of Raj's first hospitalization, the vertigo of uncertainty, helplessness. Then knowledge, thrusting two people into the crack of silence, the terror, the future. I was lucky to be all right without ever knowing why, to have the luxury of not fighting for a reason. Yet I look at myself and Stephen, young lovers, and know we imagined a horrifying possibility ahead. We had plenty of models for death in the face of love. Thank you again so much. Thank you to everyone.
Thank you so much for that beautiful reading, Liam. Let's have another round of virtual applause for Liam O'Brien. And a round of virtual applause for everyone here this evening. I'm going to encourage the contributors to come back now and join us on screen because now we have time for Q&A. I see all these great comments coming up. I'm going to change to gallery view so I can see you all. Looking good. Hello, everyone. Wonderful. Well, one thing I was thinking actually, as you were all reading, I was thinking about this mixture of humor and seriousness. And I wondered if any of you wanted to speak to when you make the choice to move toward humor and when you make the choice to move toward, what is generally thought of as being more serious and when you blend the two together. Does anyone want to speak to that? Yes, Baron, go ahead.
Well, thank you so much for everybody for reading. I love humor mixed with the darkness, and I choose humor almost as a counterpoint to the seriousness of a piece. And sometimes that makes the serious stuff even more heartbreaking. And I don't like writing things that are all just dark right the way through. I think life has these waves of everything involved, all the colors of the rainbow, and humor and seriousness kind of go hand in hand.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to? Yeah, Emily.
Oh, thanks. First of all, I was so blown away by everyone's reading and the Erasure concert. Oh my God. So thank you to start. As far as humor goes, I come from a long line of sarcastic women, and I just don't know what I would have done without the sarcasm amidst the drama and trauma. It was a beacon, and it's still very reliable comfort.
Hooray for a long line of sarcastic women. Love that. And Liam, I saw you have something to add.
Yeah, I would say that I think humor is something that people who are in situations of trauma often turn to as just a way of getting through. You know, if we can still laugh, we're still alive.
And also, I think like from what we survived, like some things are just laughable. You know, it's like some guy yelled at me on the street the other day, calling me like filthy, that I brought COVID to Canada, all this shit. And I just started laughing. And all the Canadians were like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, I lived in New York for 17 years. Crazy guy yelling at me in the street. It's like Tuesday, okay? Like, but it's like, you know, I just laugh at things.
Yeah, laughter as a survival tool, absolutely. And I see, there's a question that ties into this. How did it feel to write, from the audience, how did it feel to write your piece? And how did it feel tonight to read it? Does anyone want to speak to either of those? Yeah, Dan.
I think I'm unmuted. It's been a while since I've done a Zoom, so I it's like having to refresh myself with all the tech. I just remember reading the call for submissions and just feeling like I had been waiting to talk about this forever, you know, and that that had always felt, and I think you said this in your introduction, Matilda, that it was like our story was not the story that anyone was interested in hearing. You know, I mean, it was like we didn't, you know, and there was the weight like that had with me for so long about just that sense of knowing that to be me, to be a gay man, to be, you know, to be who I was to live with the knowledge that I would that it would kill me. And you know, and that weight was just something that had always been there. So the experience of writing this was to sit down and let it out. That it was the easiest writing that I have ever done in my life. You know, it was almost as though I just sat down with you know, literally with pen and paper and just said what had been in my head for, you know, for all my life. And I've done a lot of writing and a lot of contributing and a lot of things like that, but that has never been anything that I've ever talked about or written about. And it was just so empowering to have someone ask me, "Hey, would you tell your story of what it was like, you know, what it was like to come of age knowing that you were going to die?" And you know, that was anyway. So I just want that was my experience of writing it, and I just want to thank you for giving us that experience, the opportunity to do that.
Thank you so much. That is so beautiful, and it really does come through in your piece how organically it's written. Does anyone else want to speak to that question of either how it felt to write the piece or how it felt to read it? Yeah, Barron, I saw you.
So I've talked about this story for years, and there's segments of this story, specifically the bug chasing at the very early age of living on the streets, thinking that if I got AIDS, I would die with my best friend who I was in love with immediately. And then we went through that phase of, if I hear AIDS one more time, I'm going to scream or kill myself. So when this submission came out, I knew that this was an opportunity for me. This is the only picture in my addiction that I have saved in 30 years of being addicted of Randy. This is Randy at the very beginning. And I have always wanted to talk about him and about Billy Boy. And this was very difficult for me to write, because if you read later on in the story, there's some pretty awful trauma that happens, and it's at the hands of, or the non-hands of myself. And I was throwing up in between writing segments. I'd go into the bathroom and dry heave. So it was cathartic to get it out, but getting it out was pretty traumatic.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that intensity. Thank you, Baron, and for the piece, of course. Does anyone else want to say anything about either the process of writing the piece or of reading it tonight? Anything jumping out for anyone else? And I also want to encourage anyone in the audience, if you have any questions, throw them in the Q&A, or rather in the chat. And one thing I was thinking about, and also anyone, any contributor, if you have anything to say about any previous questions, just let me know at any point. But one thing I was thinking about is the really wide geographical range of the pieces tonight. So we have Edmonton, we have San Francisco, we have Baltimore, we have Indiana, we have New York, we have Washington State, Santa Fe, of course. And I was wondering if anything struck any of you in either listening to the geographical range or in reading the book about either similarities or differences across that geographical range. Did anything jump out to anyone, or just a cadence, you know, like Andrew saying that he had been at that Erasure concert? Was there anything that struck people in any particular way in that sense? Well, I'll say one thing actually, just about in terms of creating the book, because I always strive, this is my 6th anthology, I'm always striving for that geographical range. And this time is the broadest by far, I have to say, because often my anthologies are heavily coastal. And this book is not that way at all. And part of that, I think, is because people are writing about where they grew up in some ways. And so we've all ended up in different places, but we're also writing about what formed us. But I really felt some of the things that were really interesting to me are, like, for example, when Dan mentioned that Got AIDS Yet, right? You know, that GAY graffiti, and that's mentioned in another piece. Now, Dan's graffiti is on the East Coast. The other piece is in California, right? And so there are just these interesting, very specific things that are sometimes about trauma, but also sometimes like Blockbuster Video, for example, or ordering videos, just that experience of the video store or the bookstore. Those are other, you know, those are some of the things that were very interesting to me that I would, you know, if someone said, well, what are the themes of the book? I wouldn't have said Blockbuster Video. And I see there's a new comment here, a new question, but of course, anyone else, feel free if you have anything you want to add about that question of geographical range, the question of what it felt to write the piece. But here's a new question. Does anyone have comments about, does anyone have comments about this pandemic, meaning the coronavirus, COVID-19, and the AIDS pandemic, contrasts and comparisons? Dan, yes.
Okay, I got to be really careful on this. And I can't imagine that anyway, the timing on this was so weird because you know, thinking about that time period and then having, how to say this? Okay, I'm just gonna say it. It really fucking pissed me off the way people reacted to this pandemic, because basically what it felt like to me was this kind of, and I know this isn't real, it's just the way I felt, because a lot of this was sort of revved up in me because of just having written this story when all this started. But I was kind of like, fuck you people, where were you, where were you, and where was your concern, back in the 80s. We had a pandemic that was killing people then, and and generally it just felt like people were like, oh well, let her rip, it's taken out the undesirables. And that's, like that got AIDS yet that you mentioned, Matilda. I saw that in another story when I was reading the book. That was the attitude. That was what I grew up with. That was what people really felt and what they really thought and what they were really saying. And they felt that way for a really, really long time while we died. And so when people started being affected by this pandemic, I was like, get over yourself, bitches. We've been there, we've done this, and I don't feel particularly fucking sorry for you now. And I'm going to shut up now before I say something really, really, really that's going to get me in trouble too much.
Yeah, does anyone else have something they want to add?
I would just say they still do hate us, Dan. I do international HIV work, and there are places where people living with HIV are more populous than left-handed people, and we're still hated, even in places that are generalized epidemics. But the one thing I would say about like listening to other people and reading other people's work is, Baron, that was so brave of you, and I'm almost embarrassed at how much I hid that part of my life that you talked about. And I really appreciate you bringing that forward and being brave enough to put that out there. So thank you.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Did anyone else want to comment? Oh yes, Emily.
I was going to comment on this continual struggle that I experience at this time in this pandemic situation, where there's this there are just so many factions and perspectives about vaccines and about what is safe and what is necessary for informed consent, or is informed consent necessary. And I think of all the different things, and I have zero answers, but the dilemmas persist, and I get so confused, because when I apply some of the logic, like the logic of, well, with HIV, for instance, I after my mother passed in 93, I started teaching about HIV exactly 2 weeks later, and I have never stopped really much. And so at that time, though, like, bloodborne pathogens trainings included the reality that nobody has to disclose anything, because nobody does. So if you're working in a preschool or you're working in anywhere, you simply have to understand the lay of the land, and you don't know. So you have to interact as if everybody was HIV positive. And so that was the attitude then. But how does that really apply to a respiratory situation? And so I get very, these dilemmas persist. And so no answers, but yep, questions, lots of those. Thank you.
No, that's great. Thank you for those questions. I see that someone is asking, let's see, about the anthology, the geographical range, and whether it includes international contributions. So I could speak to that, of course. There's a lot of Canadian contributors, including Baron. I think there's like probably 7 Canadian contributors. There's someone writing about growing up in Colombia. There's someone writing about growing up in Panama. There's someone writing about emigrating from Egypt to Berlin. And there's a few other pieces that move geographically. To between countries. I think that speaks to the main, most of the contributions that are outside of the U.S. I do really feel like they add a lot of layers to the book. For example, like the person writing about Colombia, he's writing about safer sex education in Colombia in the early 2000s, late 90s, mid to late 90s, early 2000s. And it's so interesting to see like the parallels and differences to here that I actually would not have known about at all. Or the piece about growing up in Egypt, where that contributor is writing about emigrating to Berlin to get better treatment, and then the racism and xenophobia and AIDS phobia that they experience in, of course, Germany, even with this healthcare system that is supposedly, vaunted in a particular way. So that's just a little bit of that. I see that. Let me make sure I'm not missing any questions. Okay, it doesn't look like I'm missing anything. Do any contributors have anything you want to add? We have just a few more minutes. One thing I wanted to mention actually is there's a really interesting event that's coming up on Friday that Barron is featuring in. And that's an event by, the collective called What Would an HIV Doula Do? And they realized that Barron's piece, which is called Hockey Night in Canada, that actually Francisco Ibanez Carrasco had written a piece called Hockey Night in Canada a few decades earlier in the zine Disease Pariah News. And so the two of them are going to be reading their pieces together. And that's on Friday at 7 p.m. It's a virtual event, of course, and it's at the Bureau of General Studies Queer Division, which is the queer bookstore in the LGBTQ Center in New York. So that you can register online at their website. Does anyone want to add? One other thing I will add, and some other contributors have spoken to this, but just I am just so, like I said in my intro, right? Every time I read the pieces, I experience emotions that I didn't expect. But it's even more true when I hear people read them. And many of you, I just heard you read aloud for the first time. Like every single piece, I found myself getting close to tears. Like I have to pull it together, in between, just because of all the layers of emotion that I feel like are in the room and that are continuing today for all of us. So I just wanted to thank everyone for your vulnerability and for joining this conversation in that way with so much intimacy and depth of feeling and layers of analysis and awareness. So thank you all. So if no one has anything else to add, then I think let's just bring it back to Valerie to say goodbye. Did you have anything you wanted to say, Valerie?
Yeah, well, I just want to thank you, Matilda, again, and thank everybody for their bravery. And I love reading. I've loved reading these stories, but it's a true gift to be read to. And I just appreciate that so much this evening. As long as we're mentioning future events, there is another event happening in conjunction with World AIDS Day tomorrow at SFCC. We are doing a screening of United in Anger, A History of ACT UP. And the screening will be followed by a question and answer period by one of the film's producers, Sarah Schuleman. So that's tomorrow at 12:30 Mountain Time, and I'm getting ready to paste the registration link into the chat should you want to register for that. So, and despite whether you've registered for it or not, I'll be sending you an invite tomorrow with the Zoom address if you decide to join us at the last minute. So thank you all so much. And it just, thank you isn't enough. I appreciate being part of what has happened tonight and feel connected to you in that community. So thank you.
Thank you all so much. Let's blow each other kisses.
Thank you. And I want to say special thanks to everybody who read, and special thanks to Austin for helping out with all the things. And a special thanks to the foundation and the creative writing department and our school and marketing and Matilda. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Emily, for making this event happen. And thanks everyone for coming. Oh, and I should mention the book is going into a second printing. So thanks for all the support. Bye, everyone. Have a great night.